This lesson is looking at some of the key consequences and outcomes of the American Revolution. Many major events, like a revolution, have lasting impacts on a region, country, and the people who live inside it. These ripple effects may influence social life, law, and the economy. The formation of the new country, known as the United States, occurred shortly after the end of the American Revolution, and much of the strategy to organize and structure the new country reflected the experiences of the colonists before and during the conflict. Why does this matter? Many of the roots of early American statehood were impacted by the American Revolution itself. Without the American Revolution, it's possible that the United States could be under the hand of British rule even today. Although many people associate the American Revolution with the important Declaration of Independence in 1776, there's another document that is crucial for the end of the conflict and the efforts that followed. This is known as the Treaty of Paris, and it was signed on September 3rd, 1783. In this official document, the colonies were granted independence from Great Britain, giving the colonists the opportunity to join together this new region as a country of its own. Forming their own government and writing their own laws were two of the most important priorities during this time. There were also challenges with how to deal with land. At the end of the American Revolution, the British gave America back all the land previously claimed by Great Britain during the French and Indian War. Colonists had not been allowed to move into parts of this land because the British were reserving it for Native Americans, and giving back this land opened the doors for white settlement across the continent. As a result of the end of the war, the British forces had to vacate the new American territory. The armed forces leaving the area, however, was symbolic of the end of another tie that broke apart at the end of the Revolution, and that had to do with the economic connection that the United States and the colonies had with England. Prior to the American Revolution, colonists were required to trade only with Great Britain. That trade was heavily impacted by the mandated taxes of the time, leaving colonists stuck paying those taxes and complying with British rules in order to get the goods they needed. And this was in fact part of the reason that the colonists rose up and did not want to live under this oppressive rule any longer. So once the war was over, however, the new Americans were allowed to set up their own trade agreements and have a lot more economic mobility and freedom in order to get the goods that they needed. And this had important ramifications for the colonists as well as Great Britain. Great Britain, in doing this, lost a major source of income in terms of these taxes, and this was in the aftermath of an expensive war. So when we think about consequences, it's also important to consider how Great Britain was challenged in this aftermath as well. In addition to the economic changes at play, there were also major governmental changes at work as well. Some of the colonists had major frustrations with British rule, and one of the foundational sources of conflict here was that the colonists had no say over the decisions made about their lives. So obviously the determination to set up a government after the American Revolution was really impacted by their frustrations over interaction with the British government in the years before and during the American Revolution. It became a big question on how to structure this new government in order to account for all their previous frustrations, but also to give the new government enough power to actually be effective. And while there were many things that the colonists could agree on, there were also things that they struggled with. For example, they did not want a national government that had too much power. That was something they had had to cope with living under the rule of King George. So compromise became critically important. How to empower a government with enough opportunities to accomplish the basic needs of managing a state, but to also keep it from encroaching on individual rights. The new government would need to have enough power to make decisions that impacted all of the colonies without holding so much power that citizens were frustrated. And this was a really tender time for the new government, especially since people had just come off of fighting a war. Really essential to set up a government that was effective and relatively capable of handling the challenges of being a new country. Striking this balance in terms of compromise was not easy, but the colonists and the men leading the charge for new government formation knew that in order to make their own decisions, they'd have to work together and arrive at compromises. And there were many changes that happened as a result of the American Revolution, especially with regard to economics and government.